The planet stretched out beneath the ship like a scarred, frozen ocean. Mountains jutted from the surface like jagged teeth, and deep chasms carved dark veins through the land. The human scout, Kale, pressed his forehead against the viewport, watching the harsh beauty of the world below. He had heard the reports about this planet, how savage it was, home to creatures that had never been seen by human eyes, let alone studied. The most terrifying of all, the warrior species, had destroyed entire exploratory teams before. But Kale was trained for this. He had to be. He descended into the planet's atmosphere, the ship shuddering as it cut through storms of ice and rock. He landed in a valley surrounded by black cliffs. The air smelled of ozone and something metallic like rust. Kale adjusted his suit, checking sensors and life support systems. Every inch of the environment screamed danger. He reminded himself why he was here. Humanity needed to understand these aliens. Not to fight them, but to learn from them. Maybe even find a way to coexist. Kale's boots crunched against the frozen ground as he moved toward a nearby ravine. His sensors had detected movement, something big, something alive. He crouched behind a rock, peering down. That's when he saw her. She was unlike anything he had imagined. Towering and powerful, her body was covered in scales that shimmered in the weak light. Muscles rippled under her skin and her eyes were golden, sharp, and calculating. She held a weapon unlike any human design which pulsed with energy. She fought another alien, and the battle was brutal and precise. Every strike she made was deadly, every movement fast and exact. She was terrifying and mesmerizing. Kale's heart raced and he reminded himself to stay hidden. One wrong move and he would be dead in seconds. But he couldn't tear his eyes away. There was something in her movement, something beyond instinct or training. She fought like a storm, but he could see a spark of intelligence, a trace of emotion, even if it was fleeting. The alien warrior's opponent fell with a scream, leaving her standing alone, her chest rising and falling with effort. She scanned the area and Kale froze. Her eyes flicked toward him. He ducked behind the rock, holding his breath. A heartbeat later, she turned away, seemingly unconcerned, but Kale's mind raced. She had noticed him. He needed to get closer. If humanity was going to understand this species, Kale had to study them at a safe distance, record behaviors, and maybe communicate somehow. But the closer he got, the higher the risk. He moved carefully, every step measured, using rocks and shadows for cover. Hours passed, and Kale watched the warrior as she hunted, rested, and interacted with her surroundings. She was relentless, but there were moments when she paused, looking at the world with what seemed almost like curiosity. Kale wondered if she had ever felt loneliness or fear, or even boredom. Night fell, the sky turning a dark violet shade. The temperature dropped and wind howled through the cliffs. Kale set up a small hidden sensor array to record her patterns. He lit a tiny heat source to stay warm, making sure it stayed hidden from her detection. He was careful. He had learned the hard way that this warrior could detect the smallest signs of life. Then, as he reviewed the data, he heard it, a sound that made his blood run cold. The warrior was approaching. Kale froze, hiding behind a large boulder. Her steps were heavy, deliberate, and terrifyingly precise. She scanned the rocks, sniffing the air, listening for anything out of place. Kale's heart pounded in his chest. He had to remain still. A shadow fell across him. He looked up and saw her standing just a few meters away, her golden eyes piercing the darkness. She tilted her head, studying him, almost as if she were trying to understand why he was there. Kale swallowed, keeping perfectly still, hoping she would lose interest. Instead, she stepped closer. Kale's mind raced. He had no weapon ready, and his suit was not designed for direct combat with a creature like this. He considered running, but even in the darkness, he knew she would catch him in seconds. Then something strange happened. She paused, her head cocked, and she let out a low, rumbling sound. Kale didn't recognize it as aggressive, but it wasn't friendly either. She sniffed the air again, and then, incredibly, she turned and walked away. He exhaled slowly, relief flooding through him. But the encounter had changed something. He felt a strange connection, like she had sensed something in him, something more than fear. Kale knew he had to be careful, but he also knew that this warrior was unlike any other alien he had studied. There was intelligence, cunning, and perhaps even the ability to feel. He recorded everything she did, analyzing patterns, noting reactions to environmental changes, and even subtle gestures, how she flexed her fingers, how her eyes shifted when she saw him. The next day, Kale moved closer, hiding among rocks and cliffs. He left small signs, scratches on trees, noises made with stones to see if she would notice. At first she ignored them. Then slowly she began investigating. She would pause near his markers, sniff the air, tilt her head, and then continue her patrols. It was a game, a silent interaction that neither spoke of. Kyle realized he was learning something important. This warrior was not just a killer. She had curiosity, a mind that could adapt, and perhaps even the capacity for something like trust. But it was risky. If he misstepped, she could end him in an instant. Days passed and their silent interaction grew. Kale began to understand her patterns. When she hunted, when she rested, when she was most alert. He noticed how she reacted to sounds and movements, how her attention could be caught by the smallest details. He was beginning to see a mind behind the savagery, a mind that was sharp, aware, and formidable. One evening, while Kale was observing her from a hidden cliff, a sudden roar echoed through the valley. Another alien approached, one much larger and more aggressive. The warrior immediately shifted from hunter to protector. Kale watched as she fought with unmatched skill, defending herself against the overwhelming threat. Something about the battle was different. She moved with precision, anticipating her opponent's moves, countering them effortlessly. Kale realized that she was not just strong, she was strategic, intelligent, and adaptable. It was a reminder that humans were not the only species capable of complexity, but it also reminded him how lucky he was to survive this long. After the fight, the warrior stood victorious but wounded. Kale wanted to help, but he knew revealing himself now would be suicidal. Yet he couldn't ignore the urge to act. He gathered some medical supplies from his pack and carefully left them where she could find them without seeing him. The next morning, he found the supplies disturbed. She had discovered them. There was no sign of aggression, no immediate attack. Instead, it seemed like acknowledgement, a silent understanding. Kale felt a thrill of hope. Perhaps she could learn to trust him. Perhaps humans and this savage alien warrior could find a way to communicate, even if just through actions. Their interactions continued, subtle and cautious. Kale remained hidden but attentive. He left more supplies, small gifts, and signs, each designed to test her reaction. And each time she responded, not aggressively, not with fear, but with curiosity. It was the first step. The first fragile connection between two species that had only known violence and fear. Kale knew it was dangerous, and he knew it could all end in an instant. But he also knew that something extraordinary was happening. By the end of the week, Kale was confident enough to move closer during daylight, still hidden, still careful. He observed her not just as a subject, but almost as a companion. She hunted, explored, and rested with him watching, sometimes pausing in ways that suggested awareness of his presence. And in those moments, Kyle realized something profound. Despite her ferocity, despite her savagery, she was capable of something more, an emotion, a spark that had never been seen before in her species. And somehow he had been the cause. The planet remained dangerous, the warrior remained lethal, and every moment was a test of courage and wit. But Kale could not ignore the feeling growing inside him, a mixture of fear and fascination. The warrior had captured his attention completely, and he had a strange sense that she was beginning to notice him too, not just as prey, but as something else. As night fell again, Kale sat in his hidden shelter, reviewing the day's recordings. The warrior had not attacked him, and she had not ignored him. She was learning, adapting, and perhaps even forming a bond. It was unprecedented, remarkable, and terrifying all at once. He could only wonder what would happen next, knowing that every step forward could be their first step toward trust, or their last step toward destruction. But one thing was certain, neither of them would ever be the same again. The savage alien warrior had not yet tamed her instincts, but Kale had sparked something she had never felt. Something that would grow, change, and perhaps one day make her heart race. And with that thought, Kale drifted into a restless sleep, the sounds of the alien night echoing through the frozen valleys, the shadow of the warrior moving silently in the distance, watching, waiting, and learning. The morning sun broke over the jagged mountains, casting long shadows across the icy valley. Kale moved carefully along the cliffs, keeping to the shadows. The warrior was somewhere below, hunting or patrolling. It was impossible to tell. He had learned to read her movements, her patterns, the subtle signs that revealed when she was focused or distracted. Every observation was valuable. Every moment brought him closer to understanding her. Kale set up another hidden sensor, placing it behind a pile of rocks that matched the surrounding landscape. He adjusted the lenses to capture both movement and heat, careful not to make a sound. The warrior had survived countless battles, and Kale had learned that she could detect even the faintest disturbance. One wrong step and it would be over. Hours passed. Kale watched as she moved through the valley like a shadow, her every movement precise, her senses sharp. She paused occasionally, sniffing the air, listening for sounds only she could hear. Kale marveled at her awareness, at the way she seemed to merge with her environment. Even the wind seemed to obey her presence, flowing around her as if acknowledging her dominance. Kale's fascination grew, but so did his fear. One day, a sudden tremor shook the ground. Rocks tumbled down the cliffs, and Kale almost lost his balance. The warrior froze in the distance, her head snapping toward the noise. Kale held his breath. Her golden eyes scanned the area, and for a long moment he thought she had found him. Then, to his relief, she turned back to her hunt. But the incident reminded him how fragile his position was, how easily a moment of carelessness could cost him everything. Over the next few days, Kale experimented with small gestures. He left minor marks on trees, small patterns of stones, and even subtle scratches in the ice. At first she ignored them, but gradually she began to notice. She would pause near his markers, studying them with a cautious curiosity. She did not destroy them or ignore them completely. She simply observed, and Kale felt a surge of hope. One evening, Kale decided to take a bigger risk. He left a small package of food near a rock, just beyond the line of sight but close enough that she could find it. It was a simple gesture, something humans did to show goodwill, but he did not expect her to understand it. The next morning, Kyle approached the spot cautiously. The package was gone. There was no sign of aggression, no trace that it had been torn apart violently. She had taken it carefully, almost deliberately. Kale felt a strange thrill. It was the first real acknowledgement from her, a silent communication that went beyond fear and caution. Days turned into weeks. Kale began to notice subtle changes in the warrior's behavior. She lingered in certain areas longer, paused more often, and occasionally looked in his direction as if trying to sense his presence. Kyle's heart raced when he noticed these small signals. He was building a connection with a being known for its savagery, a creature that had destroyed entire teams before him. Then came the first real test. A rival alien, massive and aggressive, entered the valley. It roared, shaking the ground and challenging the warrior. Kale watched from his hidden perch, knowing that she would fight with lethal skill. But this time, something unexpected happened. She did not attack immediately. She assessed the threat, circling and analyzing. Kale realized she was thinking, planning, not just reacting. The battle was brutal. The rival struck first, its claws tearing through the frozen ground, but the warrior dodged and countered with a precision that left Kale breathless. She fought with a combination of strength and strategy, exploiting weaknesses, predicting movements. Kale had seen humans train for years to achieve this level of skill, and she was naturally born with it. At one point, the rival lunged at her, but she was ready. She dodged and used her environment, hurling rocks and debris with calculated force. Kale marveled at her intelligence, at the way she adapted mid-battle. Finally, she overpowered the rival, leaving it incapacitated but alive. She did not kill it unnecessarily, and Kale saw the spark of something unexpected: restraint, judgment, even compassion. After the battle, the warrior seemed different. She moved more cautiously, pausing to rest, surveying the valley. Kale watched as she cleaned her weapon and groomed herself, movements that were almost ritualistic. He noticed her eyes flick toward his hidden perch occasionally. He did not move. He had learned that revealing himself now could undo all the trust he had built. One night, Kale could not sleep. He watched the warrior from a distance as she slept under a rock overhang. Her breathing was steady, her body relaxed, yet there was a tension in her posture that spoke of constant vigilance. Kyle realized how lonely she must be, how even the strongest beings need connection. He wanted to approach her, to show her that she was not alone, but he hesitated. One wrong move could end everything. Instead, he left small gifts nearby while she slept, edible plants from his pack, a few simple tools. It was a silent gesture, an attempt at communication. The next morning, he found the gifts moved. arranged in a way that suggested she had noticed. She had touched them, examined them, and perhaps even appreciated them in her own way. Kale's heart swelled with hope. As days passed, their interactions became more deliberate. Kale observed her from greater distances, leaving messages in subtle ways, using patterns and symbols. She began to respond, leaving signs of her own. Sometimes she scratched a mark near one of his. Sometimes she arranged stones in a pattern that suggested acknowledgement. It was slow, cautious, but it was communication. A bridge forming between two species. The bond grew stronger during moments of danger. One afternoon, Kale was caught in a sudden ice storm. Visibility dropped and the cold bit into his suit. He stumbled, almost falling into a crevasse. Before he could react, the warrior appeared. She moved with speed and precision, pulling him back to safety with a strength that left him stunned. He saw a new side of her, protector, guardian, not just predator. After that incident, Kyle knew their connection had deepened. She had recognized his presence not as a threat but as something worth protecting. The realization filled him with both awe and caution. He knew the warrior was still deadly, still savage in many ways, but he also knew that she was beginning to trust him. One evening, Kale dared to move even closer, remaining hidden but within a few meters. The warrior was hunting, her movements fluid and precise. He watched her from behind a boulder, heart racing. She paused, sniffed the air, and then incredibly turned toward him. For a moment their eyes met. Golden eyes met human brown, and Kale felt something shift, a recognition, a spark, a connection that neither fully understood. She did not attack. She did not flee. She simply observed him, tilting her head, studying him as if trying to understand why he was there. Kyle held his breath, afraid to move, afraid to blink. And then, slowly, she turned and moved away, her form melting into the shadows. The encounter left Kale shaken but exhilarated. He realized that she was learning to see him as more than a threat, that she was capable of curiosity, judgment, and perhaps even something like emotion. He recorded every movement, every glance, every subtle gesture, knowing that this was the beginning of something extraordinary. The days became a delicate dance of observation, trust, and risk. Kale continued to leave small gifts and signs, and she continued to respond in her own way. Their silent communication grew richer, filled with nuance and meaning. Kale began to understand her mind, her instincts, and even her desires. She was still a warrior, still savage when necessary, but she was also learning, adapting, and forming a bond that transcended species. Then came the first real test of their trust. A human extraction team landed nearby, intent on capturing the warrior for study. Kale knew the consequences would be disastrous. If they succeeded, the fragile connection he had built would be destroyed, and the warrior would likely retaliate against all humans. He acted quickly, using his knowledge of the terrain and the warrior's patterns to guide her away from the danger. It was risky, and he exposed himself in the process. The warrior could have attacked him at any moment, but instead she followed his subtle guidance, moving with him through hidden paths and secret caves. By the time the extraction team realized she was gone, she had disappeared into the frozen wilderness. Kale watched from a safe distance, heart pounding, knowing that he had not only saved himself but also protected the warrior. He felt a surge of relief and pride. Their bond had been tested, and it had endured. As night fell, Kyle sat in his hidden shelter, reviewing the events of the day. The warrior was still out there, alive, adapting, learning, and perhaps beginning to feel something unfamiliar: trust, curiosity, even the faintest hint of affection. Kale realized that their connection had deepened beyond observation or study. It had become something personal, something meaningful. He knew the days ahead would be filled with danger, challenges, and uncertainty. But he also knew that for the first time, a savage alien warrior had begun to see a human not as prey, not as a threat, but as a companion. And in the vast frozen valley amid storms and shadows, Kale felt a strange hope. A hope that two beings from different worlds, with instincts shaped by survival and battle, could learn to trust, to understand, and perhaps even to care. And with that hope, Kale drifted into a restless sleep, the sounds of the alien night echoing around him and the shadow of the warrior moving. The valley was quiet, but tension hung heavy in the air. Kyle moved carefully through the frozen cliffs, every step calculated. He had watched the warrior for weeks, learning her patterns, understanding her instincts, and forming a fragile trust. Now a new threat had emerged. An entire squad of rival aliens had arrived, far larger and more aggressive than anything either of them had faced before. Kale knew that survival depended on teamwork, on strategy, and on trust. The warrior appeared first, stepping out from behind a ridge. Her scales glimmered in the pale sunlight, her muscles taut, her weapon ready. Her golden eyes scanned the valley, noting every detail, every movement. Kale stayed hidden, but he knew that this time, he could not simply observe. He had to act, and he had to act alongside her. The rival aliens charged with a deafening roar, shaking the ground as they approached. Kale's heart pounded in his chest. The warrior crouched low, ready to strike, but Kale called out, careful to keep his voice calm. "We can do this together," he whispered, more to himself than to her. For a moment it seemed she did not understand. Her eyes flicked toward him, questioning, suspicious. Then she seemed to sense his intent. The careful planning in his movements, the calculated bravery he displayed. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. It was the first sign of complete understanding between them. The battle began. The rival aliens attacked in waves, their claws and teeth tearing at the frozen ground. The warrior moved with speed and precision, striking down foes with calculated force. Kale watched, learning from her, predicting her moves and using his knowledge of the terrain to gain advantages. He lured enemies into traps, set minor obstacles, and coordinated his actions with hers without a word. They fought as a unit, a strange combination of human ingenuity and alien strength. Kale marveled at her adaptability. She shifted strategies mid-battle, countering attacks he had never anticipated, and she watched him too, protecting him, anticipating his movements, allowing him to guide some of the enemies into positions where her strength could be most effective. Hours passed. The valley was littered with unconscious or retreating enemies. The warrior had sustained minor injuries, scratches along her scales, but nothing life-threatening. Kale's suit was torn and scuffed, his body exhausted, but he had never felt more alive. They had survived together, relying not just on instinct but on communication, trust, and the bond that had grown between them. After the battle, the valley fell silent. The wind howled through the cliffs, carrying with it the sense of blood and ice. The warrior stood tall, surveying the aftermath. Her chest rose and fell with effort, and her eyes flicked toward Kale. For the first time, there was no caution in her gaze, no hint of suspicion. There was only acknowledgement and something deeper, something that even she could not yet fully understand. Kyle approached slowly, careful not to startle her. He held out a hand, not in threat but in gesture of peace. The warrior studied it, sniffing the air, her golden eyes narrowing. Then incredibly she extended one of her own hands toward him. Their fingers met briefly, a simple touch, but one filled with meaning. It was trust, acknowledgement, and the first real connection between their species. Days passed, and Kale and the warrior continued to navigate the valley together. They hunted, explored, and patrolled side by side. Kale taught her small human strategies, ways to use the environment to their advantage. She taught him how to move silently, how to read the terrain, how to anticipate danger. Their bond deepened, built on mutual respect, shared danger, and the subtle understanding that they could rely on each other. One evening, as they rested near a hidden cave, Kale noticed something in her behavior that he had never seen before. She paused, her gaze distant as if recalling memories long buried or instincts she did not understand. Kale sat quietly beside her, not speaking, allowing her to remain in her thoughts. Slowly, she turned to him, her eyes softening, and for the first time, Kale saw a flicker of emotion that went beyond curiosity or caution. There was something almost human in her gaze, an awareness, a connection, and perhaps the beginnings of affection. The warrior had changed. She was still fierce, still a creature of survival and combat, but she was learning something new: trust, empathy, and the strange, unpredictable pull of emotion that humans called attachment. Kale felt a thrill of hope and wonder. He realized that even the most savage of beings could learn to feel, to connect, and to care. Their peace was short-lived. A new threat emerged, one larger and more cunning than any before. The rival alien squad had regrouped, bringing reinforcements. They were determined, aggressive, and relentless. Kale and the warrior prepared once again, knowing that failure was not an option. The battle began with a roar, echoing through the frozen cliffs. Kale moved strategically, using traps and terrain to his advantage. The warrior struck with lethal precision, her movements a blur of strength and skill. But this time the enemy was clever, adapting to their tactics, forcing them to adjust on the fly. Kyle realized that brute force alone would not win this battle. He needed to inspire her, to channel her strength not as raw aggression but as a coordinated effort. He shouted, guiding her actions, signaling positions, predicting enemy movements. She listened, adapting, following his lead in ways that seemed impossible just weeks before. Together, they fought with unparalleled synergy. Kale used human ingenuity, creating distractions and traps. The warrior struck with unstoppable power, protecting him, countering threats and turning their enemies against each other. Each moment of coordination deepened their bond, transforming their trust into something almost instinctive. The battle reached its climax in the center of the valley, where the largest of the rival aliens charged at them both. Kale stood his ground, calculating the enemy's path. The warrior stepped forward, meeting the threat head-on. Kale moved to flank the enemy, using the environment to create an opening. The warrior struck, sending the rival staggering. Kale took advantage, delivering a precise blow that incapacitated the creature. Together, they stood victorious, the valley silent once more. The warrior turned to Kale, her golden eyes meeting his. There was no hesitation, no fear, only acknowledgement. And then something extraordinary happened. She leaned closer, nudging him gently. Not in aggression, but in connection. Kale felt a strange warmth, a thrill he had never known. He realized that the warrior's heart, once driven only by instinct and survival, had begun to beat differently. Around him, she had learned trust, courage, and even affection. In the days that followed, Kyle and the warrior explored the valley together with a new understanding. They shared the spoils of their hunts, rested side by side, and communicated in ways that transcended words. Kyle taught her about human emotions, about strategy, about patience. She taught him about the land, about instincts, about survival. And somewhere along the way, a spark had grown, one that neither could fully explain but both recognized. Their bond became a symbol, even if only to themselves. Humans and alien warriors could coexist. Trust and empathy could overcome even the deepest instincts of violence. Kale knew that their story could change how humanity viewed this planet, this species, and perhaps even the galaxy. But for now, it was enough to survive together, to learn together, and to feel together. One night, as the stars glimmered above the jagged peaks, Kale and the warrior sat side by side, watching the sky. The wind whispered through the cliffs, carrying the scent of ice and rock. The warrior leaned slightly closer, her golden eyes softening as she regarded him. Kale felt a rush of emotion, relief, wonder, and something deeper. For the first time, he realized that he had not only survived among savages, but he had changed one, and in doing so, had found something extraordinary. The warrior turned her gaze outward again, scanning the horizon, ever vigilant. But Kale noticed a subtle difference now. Her posture was relaxed, her movements measured, her eyes calm. She had survived countless battles, but she had also learned something new. That strength was not only in combat, but in trust, connection, and the courage to feel. Kyle reached out his hand, and she touched it again, their fingers meeting in silent understanding. No words were necessary. They had faced danger, fought together, and discovered trust in a world that had known only fear. Their hearts, human and alien, had begun to beat in unison, bridging the gap between species, instincts, and worlds. As dawn broke over the frozen valley, Kale knew that this was only the beginning. Together they could face anything, storms, enemies, and even the unknown. The warrior had been savage once, ruled by instinct and survival. But now, she had learned to feel, to trust, and to fight alongside someone who had shown her another way. And as they moved forward into the new day side by side, Kale realized something extraordinary. He had not only made a savage alien warrior see him as more than prey or threat, he had made her heart race, and in doing so they had changed each other forever. The frozen cliffs, the jagged valleys, and the icy winds were no longer just a battlefield. They had become a world where trust, courage, and connection could thrive. And in that world, Kale and the warrior were no longer merely human and alien. They were partners, survivors, and pioneers of something greater than either had ever known.